Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In this video now, we're going to create a virtual machine and install Windows Server 2012 operating system, just like we did for the domain controller. But this time I'm actually going to create what I call virtual hard drives. And then in the next couple of videos, I'm going to install the actual SQL Server 2012 and configure the SQL 2012 using the multiple drives that we just created, and then the service accounts that I've created in the Windows domain, and then we're finally going to join it. So you all go through these next series of videos step by step. So right now I'm just going to create a virtual machine and install Windows operating system and do some configurations with it. So if you open your VM workstation, you'll notice a couple of things here already that I've already got the domain controller here. If I click on it, there's the domain controller. And I've already created, for testing purposes, 2 instances of VMs, the SQL Server 1. And as you can see, it's already got SQL Server installed. And then I've also created another VM, and I've also installed SQL Server there. I mean, this is obviously a little ahead of what I need to do, but that's fine. So in this demonstration, I'm going to be creating a virtual machine from scratch again. And then I'm going to install the operating system and then install Windows to SQL 2012. And so we'll go over that step right now. I'm not going to spend too much time on this in explaining how to create a virtual machine because it's virtually identical to how we created the domain controller. So I'm just going to be somewhat fast. So if you're somewhat stuck, just look at this video, previous video of how to create a control domain controller. Again, just go next. It's obviously going to go and point to the ISO file. So just go next. Obviously, this is a evaluation, so just go next. Obviously, I'm going to call it SQL Server 3 since I already have 1 and 2. I'm going to leave it as allocating 60 gigs of hard drive, so just go next. And then I'm going to finish it, and obviously it's going to start by installing the operating system, as you can see. So if I just minimize that, or it's going to take time. So this takes about 10 minutes to install the operating system. And while that's in progress, there's a few configurations I'm going to have to do and show you here that we have done previously. One thing to note is if I look at the domain controller and SQL1 and SQL2, in a domain environment, they have what's called static IP addresses. And basically, an IP address is a physical address for each computer. Like a house that has a unique address, a computer has a unique address, and we call that IP address. So I've assigned the IP addresses to the domain controller, to SQL Server 1 here, and SQL Server 2, and I'm going to be showing you how to do that in SQL 3. And if you look at some of my screenshots here, you'll notice this is the domain controller, as you can see. And obviously, this is what's referred to as IP addressing. Now, obviously, this is more in reference to networking. And this class is not geared towards networking, so I'm not going to spend too much time in there. But just to point out that when you do create a domain controller or servers, they do need static IP addresses. And again, I'm not going to be spending too much time on there, but just to give you an illustration. So this is the domain controller IP address. And as you can see, I've got one for the server 1 address. And I'll be actually doing that, demonstrating that to you. So as a DBA, you'll understand that it's not, that's why DBAs is a very respectable and well-paid job. It's because you need to know a tremendous amount of technologies. And again, this is something you should briefly know, although it's not going to be part of your duty. So let's just close that. And close that. So while that is installing, let me open my PowerPoint just to illustrate a couple of things here. So as you'll know, I've downloaded VM Workstation 12. I have created a virtual machine and promoted it to a domain controller. And now I'm creating another virtual machine and installing virtual hard drives. And then I'm going to create service accounts. So all these 3 or 4 preceding videos are all coming to the one point of this whole series of videos, and that illustration to illustrate how to install SQL Server on a production environment. This is the entire reason we're doing this. So as you can see, it's a very important concept to understand when you're installing SQL. In my first course, I installed SQL Express Edition, and I just did the defaults, in all the data files and the log files and the NDF files and the system files. They all were located on one single hard drive, and that was drive C. So let me illustrate what I mean by that. If you purchase a single computer, most likely it'll only have one hard drive, drive C. So if you were to install Windows Express or Windows even a standard edition server, by default all the files that are related to SQL will install in drive C. But in a production environment, that's not how you install it. In a production environment, most likely you will not have one computer, but most likely you'll buy a server that has dedicated multiple hard drives. So as you can see, this illustration that I have here, obviously in this particular case, this server has 4 hard drives, as you can see. But obviously in a production environment, you're likely to have many, many more, up to 20, 30, maybe 40, depending on your environment and your budget. But the whole purpose is that when I do install SQL Server, the files associated with it, and I'll be going over that in more detail later, such as the system files, the MDF, which are data files, the LDF files, which are log files, and then the temp database files and the temp log files. All these ideally should be based on separate physical individual drives. And that's the whole idea of this series of videos, as I said, to show you how to install SQL Server in a production environment the proper way. And this is the most proper way you're going to be doing it. And if I look at this one, you'll see SQL, installing SQL 2012 files. So the MDF files are MDF files are all the files that contain the data, such as tables and indexing and views and so on. The LDF file is a file that contains all modifications to the database. There's an extra if you want to add none of these two, which is an NDF file, which is an additional file, for example, if you wanted to index. And then obviously you have a temp database with its own data file and log file. And ideally, if you can separate these into physical hard drives, you should also. So each of these files should be on their own drive to gain performance. And that's the essence of when you're installing SQL Server, you have to take this consideration right from the onset. And this is what I call being proactive. When you work for a company, you'll realize that some people who do not have a dedicated DBM, when they install SQL, you'll see that they have installed all these files, most likely either on a single C file or just a couple of files. But ideally in the production, these again should be on separate dedicated files. And this, as I said, is the reason we've gone over these 4 or 5 videos, just to illustrate that. The second thing that you should take in consideration when you're installing SQL Server is the service accounts. SQL Server runs as a service, which means that when the application is running in the background, even though you're not logged on to the server. So if you were to log off on, for example, a regular computer or a laptop, obviously the whole system is shut down. But if you log off a server running as a service, SQL service, then SQL is still running in the background, even though you're logged off. And then we're going to create what's called service accounts for each in the domain controller. And now when you install SQL files again, there's SMS, there's SSMS, SSRS, which is a reporting system, SSIS, which is the integration system, and SSAS, which is the analysis services. These are 4 primary engines, if you will, of SQL. And each, when you install SQL, they should have their own dedicated service accounts, and this is primarily done for security. And so again, this is something that you should take in consideration when you're installing SQL Production Server, the Enterprise Edition, which we are. So all this complexity will become a little more clear as we obviously demonstrate one by one of what we're doing. And I'll be obviously repeating this, but now that you have a kind of an academic understanding of the installation of SQL Server and its files and its allocation to separate drives, you'll get an idea of what we're looking for. So let's look at where we stand here. At this point, it's getting devices ready, so I'll just give it a couple of more seconds and then we can begin. I'm going to actually pause this video right now and then come back when this is ready, and then we'll continue from there. Or let me just look at it now. So again, the other thing is I don't want to run over 18 minutes or 19 minutes. I want to keep it relatively short, within 20 minutes each video. So if I have to do a part 2 for this, then I will. But I hope you understand that the importance of a responsibility of a DBA in the consideration it takes just to install SQL Server. And I think now I've illustrated the importance of those two main areas, that being physical hard drives allocation of files to separate hard drives if feasible, and then creation of service accounts. So actually I'm just going to pause this and come back and we'll take it from there. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, and we're back, and as you can see, the Windows operating system has been installed in this VM3. Another thing you'll notice here, if I go to Home and just unexpand this, you'll notice that Server 1, Server 2 has been powered off. Basically, what powering off means, if you right-click and go Power, obviously it's powering off, so they're not on. Obviously, I don't want my resources to be consumed if I'm not using them. So you can power these off or suspend them. I've actually turned them off, if you will. So you'll notice that there's no little diamond next to the two instances here, VMs. So that's what powering off means. Just I thought I'd point out. So now back to this. So as I mentioned, if I expand this, obviously, as you know, the server management keeps popping up every time you restart the service or restart the computer. One way to disable it, you'll see everything is in green, which is great. One thing to disable is just go here, go to Server Manager Properties, and then click Do Not Start Automatically on Logon, and then you won't see this window open. And I think I tried to illustrate that earlier, but I didn't show you how to do it, and that's how you do it. So now if I turn this off, a couple of things we need to do first. So this is, as I said, SQL Server 3 Windows 2012 operating system. You'll notice here there's a no communication with the network, so we're going to change that, and that's the IP addressing. You'll also look at the volume here, no audio set. If you want to change it, you can. If you want to, just go right-click Sounds, and would you like to enable? If you want to do it, that's fine. If you wanted to do that, and go OK here. Then the next thing we're going to do is, right now I'm using just the default user that I chose to install, which is me. But however, I want to change the admin account. So take your mouse, hover to the bottom left, and you'll see the start menu. Just click on it, left click, and you'll see this. And then obviously what I do is I like to pin these. So if you just right click it and just pin it to the taskbar, which I already have. And then we can go back to the desktop. So if you go to your control panel, open, go to your accounts, click on Administrator Local Account, and this is the account I'm using, or RAF as, but I don't want to use that. I want to use Administrative Account. So click on this, and we're going to create a password. Now, it's important that you create a complex password. What that means is that it must have upper letters, a combination of text, and combination of numerics or numbers, and they must be a certain length, probably by 8 characters. So I'm going to use an uppercase and both combination of, as I said, numeric and text. So that's my password. And that's my password, and create a password. Oops. So make sure that obviously there, that's why. And create password. And that's it. So admin's account has been created. And now actually if I log out and log back in using that account, I'll have a better, oops, this thing is kind of tricky if you click on it, but so go start, and this is it. So I'm going to sign out, and now I'm going to sign back in. On your workstation, if you'll notice, this is the Control-Alt-Delete. So click that, and there's the administrator. So click on the administrator, type in the password you just created, and now we're going to use this account from now on.